What happens when the woman everyone overlooks becomes the one person who can't be ignored? For Grace Chen, a 28-year-old delivery driver whose family had written her off as their greatest disappointment, Tuesday night was supposed to be just another shift. Another stack of packages, another round of invisible labor that paid just enough to keep the lights on in her studio apartment. But invisibility takes on new meaning when you witness something you shouldn't. When you become the only person standing between a bleeding stranger and the men who want him dead. In the 4 seconds it took for her to make a choice, Grace went from forgotten daughter to the most dangerous witness in the city. She didn't know the man she'd hidden in her delivery van was Dante Moretti, head of the East Coast's most powerful crime family. She had no idea that saving his life would pull her into a world where loyalty is currency and debt is paid in blood. She just knew that watching someone die when she could act felt like becoming the kind of person her parents had always believed she was. Worthless. Invisible. Nothing. So she did the one thing that made her feel human again. She ran toward danger instead of away from it. And everything changed. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share with loved ones, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The weight of being invisible was something Grace Chen had learned to carry with practiced grace. In her cramped studio apartment in Queens, wedged between a laundromat that never closed and a bodega with flickering neon lights, she'd perfected the art of not being seen. It was a survival skill learned from a family that had looked right through her for most of her life. From parents who'd measured her worth in achievements she could never quite reach and found her consistently, devastatingly lacking. The graduation incident had cemented everything. 3 years ago, Grace had been set to receive her degree in social work from a small state college. Nothing prestigious, nothing that would make headlines, but it had meant everything to her. She'd worked 2 jobs to afford it, taken night classes while serving tables during the day, survived on instant ramen and determination. She'd sent her parents the invitation 6 weeks in advance. Called to confirm they'd received it. Her mother's voice had been cool and distant on the phone. "We'll see, Grace. Your father has a lot of business commitments." But Grace had held on to hope. Because surely this one time they'd show up. This one accomplishment might be enough to make them see her as something other than the daughter who'd failed to be exceptional. The morning of graduation, she'd saved 2 seats in the auditorium. 3rd row, perfect view. She'd checked her phone obsessively, waiting for the text that said they were running late, that traffic was bad, that they'd be there soon. The text that came instead was from her older sister, Victoria. The perfect daughter, the Harvard graduate, the corporate lawyer who'd made partner at 30. "Mom and Dad aren't coming. Dad has a golf tournament, and Mom's helping him network. They said to congratulate you and that they'll take you to dinner next month to celebrate." Maybe. Grace had sat in the auditorium, surrounded by families cheering and taking photos, watching other graduates embrace their parents. She'd walked across that stage to receive her diploma with tears streaming down her face. And the 2 empty seats in the 3rd row had felt like a physical manifestation of every time she'd ever been overlooked, dismissed, forgotten. The dinner never happened, of course. Next month came and went. Her parents were busy. They were always busy when it came to Grace. The phone call that came instead, 2 weeks after graduation, had been worse than their absence. Her father's voice, clipped and disappointed, delivering his verdict on her life choices. "Social work, Grace? After everything we invested in your education, you're going to make, what, $35,000 a year? Your sister's making 6 figures. Your brother just made junior partner at his firm. And you're going to work with homeless people and addicts." "I want to help people," she'd said, her voice small. "You want to waste your potential," her mother had cut in, always the sharper blade. "We raised you to be exceptional, Grace. To be someone. But you've consistently chosen to be ordinary. We're not going to pretend to be proud of ordinary. The word had lodged in her chest like a bullet. Ordinary. The worst thing she could possibly be in their eyes. Maybe it's better if you focus on your own life for a while, her father had continued. Stop expecting us to celebrate mediocrity. When you accomplish something real, something worth acknowledging, you can call us. Until then, we need to invest our time and energy in the children who are actually making something of themselves. The line had gone dead before she could respond. And Grace had sat in her tiny apartment, her diploma propped against the wall in a frame she'd bought at a dollar store, and realized that to her own family, she was nothing. 3 years later, she still hadn't called them. And they hadn't called her either. The social work job had fallen through. Budget cuts, they'd said, eliminating entry-level positions. Grace had applied everywhere, but the economy was brutal, and competition was fierce. The rejection emails piled up in her inbox like small deaths. Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates. She'd taken the delivery driver job out of desperation. It paid $17 an hour plus tips, barely enough to cover rent and groceries. She drove a battered Honda Civic that consumed oil like it was going out of style and made concerning grinding noises when she shifted into third gear. Every day, she loaded packages into her car and drove routes through neighborhoods where people looked through her like she was furniture. Invisible labor, invisible woman. But she'd survived. She always survived. It was her one consistent talent. That Tuesday night in October, Grace was on her last delivery run. The autumn air had turned sharp and cold, the kind of weather that promised winter was coming fast. She had 6 packages left, all for addresses in Manhattan's financial district. The route would take her through some sketchy areas, but she'd done it 100 times before. Keep your head down, move fast, don't make eye contact. The survival rules of being a woman alone in the city after dark. She was stopped at a red light on a deserted street near the waterfront when she heard it. The unmistakable crack of gunfire, sharp and violent, shattering the night's silence. Every instinct screamed at her to drive. To run the red light and get as far away as possible. But something made her look instead. In the alley beside her, 3 men in dark clothes surrounded a 4th figure. The man in the center was on his knees, blood spreading across his white shirt. His hands were raised, not in surrender, but in defiance. Even from this distance, Grace could see the fury in his posture, the refusal to beg. One of the attackers raised his gun, pointing it at the kneeling man's head. Execution style. No, Grace whispered. Then, louder, no. She didn't think. Thinking would have meant recognizing the danger, acknowledging that this wasn't her problem, that getting involved would be insane. Instead, she acted on pure instinct, the same instinct that had made her choose social work despite her parents' disapproval. The need to help, to intervene, to refuse to be the kind of person who watched someone die and did nothing. Grace slammed her hand on the horn. The sound was jarring, aggressive, impossibly loud in the quiet street. All 4 men turned toward her. She saw their faces in her headlights, saw the moment they registered her presence. Police are coming, she screamed out her window, lying with desperate conviction. I already called 911. They're on their way. For one frozen second, nobody moved. Then the 3 attackers looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. The one with the gun pointed at the injured man hesitated, then lowered his weapon. Move out, he barked to his companions. They ran, disappearing into the shadows like smoke. And Grace was left staring at the man still kneeling in the alley, bleeding onto the concrete. Their eyes met across the distance. Even injured, even on his knees, there was something commanding about him. Dark eyes that held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wasn't young, maybe early 40s, with silver threading through his black hair. And there was recognition in his gaze, like he was memorizing her face, cataloging every detail. Are you okay? Her voice came out shaky. Stupid question. He was obviously not okay. He tried to stand, stumbled, caught himself against the alley wall. The blood on his shirt was spreading, dark and wet. Grace should have driven away. Called 911 for real and left him for the professionals. But she'd already made her choice when she'd honked that horn. And Grace Chen, disappointing daughter and invisible delivery driver, had never been good at doing the smart thing. She pulled her car into the alley, her hands shaking so hard she nearly hit the wall. When she jumped out, the man was trying to walk, leaving a trail of blood behind him. "You need a hospital," she said, reaching for him. "No hospitals." His voice was rough, accent present beneath the pain. "They'll find me there. You'll die without medical help. I'll die faster with it." He looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "You should go. Forget you saw this." But Grace was already wrapping his arm around her shoulders, supporting his weight as they stumbled toward her car. He was heavy, solid muscle and dead weight, and she was small, barely 5'3". But determination had always been her superpower. "I have a first aid kit," she said, grunting as she half-dragged him to the passenger seat. "And I took combat medicine training in college for a volunteer program. I can at least stop the bleeding until you tell me where to take you." He collapsed into her car, his head falling back against the seat. Up close, she could see the extent of his injuries. Gunshot wound to the shoulder, another graze across his ribs. His face was pale, lips pressed tight against the pain. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, his eyes closing. "You don't know me." Grace started the engine, her mind racing. She couldn't take him to the hospital against his wishes. But she couldn't just leave him either. Her apartment. It was 5 minutes away, quiet, private. "Because I know what it feels like to be invisible," she said quietly. "To have people look right through you like you don't matter. And I refuse to be the kind of person who watches someone die just because it's not convenient to help." His eyes opened, fixing on her with that intense stare again. "You just saved my life." "Yeah, well, don't thank me yet. I might kill you with my amateur first aid skills." Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. Then his eyes closed again, and she wasn't sure if he'd passed out or was just conserving strength. Grace drove through the empty streets with her heart hammering, a bleeding stranger in her passenger seat, and absolutely no idea what she'd just gotten herself into. But for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt terrifyingly, dangerously seen. Grace's studio apartment had never felt smaller than it did trying to maneuver a 6-foot-tall injured man through the doorway. He'd regained consciousness during the drive, enough to walk with her support, but every step left blood drops on her building stairs. She'd worry about cleaning that up later. Right now, survival took priority. "Bathroom," she gasped, steering him toward the tiny room that barely fit a toilet, sink, and shower. "Sit on the toilet lid." He complied without argument, which told her exactly how badly he was hurt. Men like him, men with that kind of intensity and command in their eyes, didn't take orders easily. But pain was a great equalizer. Grace's first aid kit was actually pretty comprehensive. She'd always been the overprepared type, the one who carried band-aids and emergency supplies. She grabbed it from under her sink, along with clean towels and the bottle of vodka she kept for the occasional bad night. "This is going to hurt," she warned, kneeling in front of him. "The shoulder wound first. I need to see if the bullet's still in there." "It's not." His voice was strained but certain. "Exit wound in the back. I felt it." She carefully peeled his ruined shirt away from the wound. He was right. There was an exit wound, ugly and bleeding, but at least she wouldn't have to dig out a bullet. She poured vodka over the entry wound, and he hissed through his teeth but didn't cry out. "You're good at this," he said after a moment, watching her work with clinical efficiency. "Combat medicine training?" "Plan to work with Doctors Without Borders," Grace said, packing the wound with gauze. Before I realized I couldn't afford the training program and needed to pay rent instead. That's why you're delivering packages. It wasn't a question. She nodded anyway, moving to examine the graze across his ribs. Less serious, but still needed cleaning and bandaging. Plans change, she said quietly. Sometimes we don't get to be who we wanted to be. No. His hand came up, catching her wrist gently. She looked up, meeting his dark eyes. Sometimes we become someone better. The words hit differently than they should have. This stranger, this man she'd found bleeding in an alley, was looking at her like she mattered. Like saving his life had been important. Significant. When was the last time anyone had looked at her like that? What's your name? He asked. Grace. Grace Chen. Grace. He said it like he was tasting the word. It suits you. Do you know who I am, Grace? She sat back on her heels, studying his face. Should she know him? There was something familiar about his features, but she couldn't place it. No, she admitted. Should I? Something complicated crossed his expression. Relief, maybe. Or regret. It's better that you don't. She finished bandaging his ribs in silence, then moved to clean the blood from his face and hands. His knuckles were bruised and split, suggesting he'd fought back hard before they'd gotten him on his knees. The men who attacked you, she said carefully. Are they going to come looking for you? Yes. Will they find you here? Not tonight. Maybe not for a few days. But eventually. He caught her hand again, his grip stronger now. You need to forget about me, Grace. Forget you saw anything tonight. Go to work tomorrow like normal. Don't tell anyone about this. I'm harboring a wounded man in my apartment. Kind of hard to forget. I'll be gone by morning. He stood, testing his balance. Better than before, though he still favored his wounded side. You've done enough. More than enough. Thank you. But Grace found herself blocking the bathroom door. You can barely stand. Where exactly are you planning to go? I have people. Places. I just need to contact them without being traced. He looked around her tiny apartment, taking in the details. The second-hand furniture, the diploma on the wall, the delivery driver uniform hanging over her kitchen chair. You don't have much. And what you have, you've worked hard for. I won't put that at risk. You're not putting anything at risk. The words came out fiercer than she intended. You're hurt, and you need rest. At least stay until morning. I'll sleep on the couch, you can take the bed. Grace, please. She wasn't sure why it mattered. Why this stranger's survival felt so important. But something in her chest insisted she couldn't let him leave. Not yet. Not when he was still bleeding. Just until morning. Then you can disappear, and I'll pretend tonight never happened. For a long moment, he studied her face. Then, slowly, he nodded. Until morning. Grace gave him clean clothes, oversized sweats she'd bought at a thrift store that somehow fit his broad frame. She made him tea while he sat at her small kitchen table, and they didn't talk about the gunshot wounds or the men who'd tried to kill him. Instead, they talked about nothing. About the weather turning cold, about the best late-night diners in the city, about anything but the violence that had brought them together. She found him staring at her diploma at one point. Social work, he said. You wanted to help people. Yeah. Didn't exactly work out the way I planned. Why not? The question was simple, but answering it meant opening doors she usually kept locked. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or the adrenaline crash, or the fact that this stranger had almost died tonight and somehow that made normal boundaries feel irrelevant. Whatever the reason, Grace found herself telling him everything. About her parents who'd never thought she was enough. About the graduation they'd skipped. About being called ordinary and mediocre and being told not to call until she'd accomplished something real. About 3 years of silence because she had nothing to offer them that they considered worth their time. They said I wasted my potential, she finished, her voice hollow. That I chose to be nothing. The silence that followed was heavy. When Grace looked up, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Anger, maybe. Or understanding. I know about disappointing families, he said finally. About trying to be something you're not because it's what's expected. My father wanted me to be a monster. To rule through fear and violence and never show weakness. For a long time, I tried to be exactly that. What changed? I realized that becoming what he wanted meant losing who I was. His fingers traced the rim of his teacup. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally are the ones who see us least clearly. They create an image of who we should be, and when we don't match it, they reject us. Not because we failed, but because they were looking at an illusion all along. Grace felt something crack in her chest. You're saying my parents never actually saw me. I'm saying you saved a stranger's life tonight without hesitation. You risked yourself for someone you didn't know. That's not ordinary, Grace. That's extraordinary. And if your parents can't see that, the failure is theirs, not yours. Tears burned in her eyes. She'd spent 3 years telling herself it didn't matter, that she didn't need their approval. But hearing this stranger, this man she'd pulled from death's edge, tell her she was worth something, it mattered more than it should have. Who are you? She whispered. Really? He smiled, sad and knowing. Someone who understands what it's like to be invisible in your own family. And someone who owes you a debt I'll never be able to repay. Grace set him up in her bed despite his protests, and she took the couch. She'd sleep in worse places. But sleep didn't come easily. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the city outside her window, and couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed. She'd saved a man's life tonight. She'd been brave and reckless and necessary. She'd been seen, truly seen, maybe for the first time in years. And tomorrow he'd be gone, vanishing back into whatever dangerous world he'd come from. She'd return to being invisible Grace, the delivery driver, the disappointing daughter, the woman nobody noticed. But tonight, just for tonight, she'd mattered. In the morning, when Grace woke to sunlight streaming through her apartment window, the bed was empty. The stranger was gone, just as he'd promised. The bloody clothes were gone too, and the bathroom was immaculately clean, all evidence of last night's emergency surgery removed. On her kitchen table, she found an envelope. Inside was $10,000 in cash and a note written in elegant script, for the woman who gave me back my life when I'd lost everything else. You are not invisible, Grace. You are Grace itself. Grace stared at the money, her hands shaking. This was more than she made in 6 months. This was enough to pay off her credit card debt, fix her car, maybe even take some certification courses to boost her resume. This was enough to change her life. But more than the money, it was the words that broke her. You are not invisible. She pressed the note to her chest and cried in her empty apartment, grieving the stranger who'd disappeared and the night when she'd been extraordinary instead of ordinary. And she had no idea that this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. Weeks later, 3 weeks passed. Grace deposited the money in her bank account in small increments, not wanting to trigger any red flags. She used part of it to fix her car, to pay off her credit cards, to buy groceries without checking her bank balance first. The simple relief of financial breathing room was intoxicating. She didn't hear from the stranger again. Whoever he was, had vanished completely. Sometimes she wondered if she'd imagined the whole thing, if it had been some fever dream brought on by exhaustion and loneliness. But the money was real, and the memory of his dark eyes was too vivid to be fantasy. She went back to her delivery routes, moving through the city like a ghost. But something had shifted inside her. She moved differently now, with more purpose. She'd saved a man's life. That mattered. She mattered, whether her family acknowledged it or not. On a cold November evening, Grace was delivering packages to a luxury building in Tribeca. The kind of place where doormen wore suits and the lobby had actual art installations. She felt out of place in her delivery uniform, but the doorman was professional and kind, directing her to the service elevator. She was loading packages onto a cart when she heard raised voices from around the corner. Male voices, angry and escalating. "You're done, Moretti. The families have voted. You're out. Vote all you want." "I'm not going anywhere." Grace froze. That voice. Deep, accented, familiar. It couldn't be. She edged around the corner and saw them. 4 men in expensive suits surrounding a fifth. The fifth man had his back to her, but she recognized the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself with controlled violence even when outnumbered. "We're not asking, Dante." One of the suits pulled out a gun. "The old man says you're a liability. Too soft. Too compromised. Time for new leadership. Dante." His name was Dante. And they were going to kill him. Later, Grace would wonder what possessed her. What made her, a 28-year-old delivery driver, think she could do anything against 4 armed men. But in that moment, she didn't think. She just moved. She grabbed the fire alarm on the wall and pulled it. The shrieking alarm was instantaneous and deafening. The building's sprinkler system activated, water cascading from the ceiling. People started pouring out of apartments, confused and annoyed. Security guards came running. In the chaos, the 4 men scattered, unwilling to commit murder in front of witnesses. And Dante turned around, water streaming down his face, and locked eyes with Grace. Recognition flared in his expression. Shock, disbelief, something that looked almost like reverence. "You," he breathed. Grace walked toward him through the artificial rain, her uniform soaked, her heart hammering. "You're making a habit of this. Getting attacked, I mean. You're making a habit of saving me." He stared at her like she was a miracle. "Why are you here?" She held up a package. "Delivery for 24C. Despite everything, despite the danger and the water and the chaos around them, Dante laughed. It was a genuine sound, warm and alive. Grace Chen. The delivery driver who saves mafia bosses and asks for nothing in return. Mafia, the word stuck in her throat. "You're Dante Moretti." He said his full name like a confession. "Head of the Moretti family. Or I was, until about 5 minutes ago when my own people decided I'd gone soft." The world tilted slightly. Grace had heard the name Moretti before. Everyone in New York had. They were one of the old families, powerful and dangerous and very, very connected. And she'd had their boss bleeding on her bathroom floor. "We need to move," Dante said, taking her arm gently. "Those men will be back once the building clears. I have deliveries, I'll buy you a new job." He was already guiding her toward the stairwell. "Right now, I'm buying your life." Again. They ran. The safe house. The truth. The choice. The safe house was a brownstone in Brooklyn, nondescript from the outside but luxurious within. Dante had made 3 phone calls during the drive, speaking rapid Italian, and by the time they arrived, there were guards positioned around the building. Grace stood in the middle of an elegant living room, still dripping from the sprinkler system, trying to process what was happening. "I'm going to ask you a question," Dante said, appearing with towels and clean clothes. "And I need you to answer honestly. Do you want to go back to your life? Back to being invisible?" The question was absurd. Of course she wanted her life back. Her safe, quiet, ordinary life. Except it wasn't ordinary anymore, was it? She'd saved a mafia boss twice. She'd pulled fire alarms and run through luxury buildings like some kind of action hero. She'd been terrified and alive and more herself than she'd felt in years. "What's the alternative?" she asked. "Stay." The word was simple, but his eyes held complicated depths. "Work for me. I need someone I can trust absolutely, and the woman who saved my life twice without asking for anything in return is the only person I trust in this city right now." "Work for you doing what?" "Whatever needs doing. I have legitimate businesses that need management. Charities that need oversight. I need someone with a conscience, Grace. Someone who sees people as human beings instead of assets." He stepped closer. "I need someone who would risk everything to help a stranger because it was the right thing to do. I'm a delivery driver. I have a degree in social work. I don't know anything about helping people. That's all that matters." His intensity was almost overwhelming. "I'm trying to change what my family does. To make us less about violence and more about actually helping our communities. But I can't do that alone. I need someone who understands what it means to be overlooked, who fights for people without power." Grace thought about her empty apartment, her endless delivery routes, the parents who'd written her off as nothing. She thought about 3 years of being invisible, of feeling like she'd wasted her life. And she thought about how alive she'd felt pulling that fire alarm. "How necessary." "If I say yes," she said slowly, "those men who tried to kill you. They'll come after me too?" "I won't lie to you. Yes, there will be danger. But I'll protect you with everything I have." He took her hands in his, the gesture gentle and grounding. "You saved my life, Grace. Twice. Let me save yours in return. Let me show you that you're not ordinary or invisible. Let me prove that you're extraordinary." The choice hung in the air between them. Safe invisibility or dangerous purpose. Grace had spent her whole life trying to be what other people wanted. Trying to be exceptional enough for her parents, trying to be small enough to avoid attention. She'd folded herself into shapes that didn't fit, trying to become someone worthy of being seen. But Dante saw her. Had seen her from the moment she'd honked her horn in that alley. Had recognized something in her that she'd stopped seeing in herself. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes." His smile was like sunrise. "Thank you." "Thank you for what?" "For giving me the chance to be better. For showing me that strength isn't about violence or fear. It's about courage in the face of danger. It's about helping people who can't help themselves." He squeezed her hands. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, Grace Chen. And I'm honored that you're giving me the chance to be worthy of that bravery." Something in Grace's chest cracked open. Not breaking, but blooming. Like a flower that had been pressed flat finally unfurling toward the sun. "What do we do first?" she asked. "First," Dante said, his smile turning slightly mischievous, "we deal with the 4 men who tried to kill me. Then we rebuild my family into something your social work ethics would approve of. Then," he paused, his expression softening. "Then we show your parents exactly what you've accomplished." "My parents?" "You saved the life of one of the most powerful men in New York City. Twice. You're about to help transform a criminal empire into a legitimate force for community good. If they can't see that as extraordinary, they're blind." His voice was fierce. "And you don't need blind people's approval to know your worth." Grace felt tears prick her eyes again. How was it that this dangerous stranger understood her better than her own family ever had? "I don't need their approval," she said, and realized it was true. "I just need to know I matter. That I'm doing something meaningful." "You do," Dante said softly. "You matter, Grace. More than you know." 6 months later. The gala. The moment. 6 months transformed everything. Grace went from delivery driver to director of the Moretti Family Foundation, a newly established nonprofit focused on community development, addiction services, and support for at-risk youth. She used her social work degree for the first time since graduating, pouring herself into creating programs that actually helped people instead of just looking good on paper. The foundation opened 3 community centers in underserved neighborhoods. They funded scholarship programs for first-generation college students. They created job training initiatives and addiction recovery programs. Real, meaningful work that changed lives. And Grace, who'd been invisible for so long, became known. Not famous, but recognized. People in the neighborhoods they served knew her name, thanked her, told her stories about how the programs had helped their families. She mattered. Finally, undeniably, she mattered. Dante had kept his word about protection. There had been threats from the families who wanted him removed, attempts to undermine his authority. But Grace had learned that the mafia world wasn't just about violence. It was about respect, about power, about proving your worth. And Dante was proving it by showing that you could be powerful without being cruel. That strength could look like helping people instead of hurting them. Tonight was the Foundation's first major fundraising gala. A black-tie event at a Manhattan hotel, attended by politicians, business leaders, and carefully vetted members of various families. It was a statement: the Morettis were going legitimate, and they were doing it with grace and power. Grace wore a dress Dante had insisted on buying her, deep emerald silk that made her feel like someone important. Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup elegant. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. But it wasn't the dress or the makeup that made her different. It was the confidence. The knowledge that she'd built something meaningful. That she was no longer ordinary or invisible. She was extraordinary. Finally, she could see it. The gala was in full swing when Dante found her at the edge of the ballroom, watching the crowd. "You look nervous," he said, offering her a glass of champagne. "I'm always nervous at these things. Too many people. You've spoken at community meetings with 50 angry residents demanding answers. You can handle some rich people in fancy clothes." His smile was warm, proud. "Besides, you're the guest of honor tonight." "You're the guest of honor." "I just run the foundation." "No." He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "This foundation exists because of you. Your vision, your heart, your refusal to accept that people in our communities don't deserve help. I just signed the checks. You did the actual work." Before she could respond, someone cleared their throat behind them. Grace turned and felt her heart stop. Her parents stood there, dressed in formal wear, looking uncomfortable and out of place. Her mother's expression was carefully neutral. Her father looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Grace," her mother said. "We received an invitation to this event. We didn't realize you were involved until we saw your name on the program." Grace's mouth went dry. She hadn't invited them. Hadn't spoken to them in 3 years. And now here they were, staring at her like she was a stranger. "I run the foundation," Grace said, surprised by how steady her voice was. "I'm the executive director." Her father glanced around the opulent ballroom. "This is quite an operation. How did you—" He stopped, clearly struggling to understand how his disappointing daughter could possibly be standing here in an evening gown, running a foundation. "Grace is extraordinarily talented," Dante said smoothly, moving to stand beside her in a show of support. "When I met her, she was working as a delivery driver, but it was immediately clear she was wasted in that role. She has vision, compassion, and the kind of strategic mind that can transform communities. In 6 months, she's built programs that are already changing lives." "And you are?" Grace's mother asked, her tone cool. "Dante Moretti. I fund the foundation, but Grace is its heart and soul." He looked at Grace with unmistakable respect. "She's remarkable. You must be very proud." The silence that followed was painful. Grace watched her parents struggle, saw the moment they realized they couldn't dismiss her anymore. Couldn't call her ordinary or mediocre when she was standing in a ballroom full of powerful people who treated her with respect. "We didn't know," her father said finally. "You never told us. You told me not to call until I'd accomplished something real." Grace's voice was quiet but firm. "I wasn't sure this would qualify, since I'm still helping homeless people and addicts, as you put it. But it turns out that work is pretty meaningful when you actually do it well." Her mother flinched. "Grace, I'm not angry," Grace said, and realized it was true. "I was, for a long time. But I'm not anymore. I don't need your approval to know I'm doing something important. I don't need you to be proud of me to be proud of myself." "That's not," her father stopped, his professional composure cracking. "We wanted what was best for you." "No. You wanted me to be what was best for you. To reflect well on you. To make you look good." Grace felt Dante's hand on her back, grounding and supportive. "But I'm not ordinary, and I'm not a disappointment. I'm just not who you wanted me to be. And that's okay. Because who I am is enough." She watched her parents absorb this, saw the discomfort and maybe, just maybe, the first flicker of understanding. "The gala's starting," Grace said. "You're welcome to stay, but I have a speech to give." "Excuse me." She walked away, head high, leaving her parents standing in her wake. Dante caught up to her at the podium. "That was magnificent," he said softly. "Are you okay?" "I'm perfect." And she was. Because for the first time in her life, she didn't need their validation. She had her own. Grace took the stage to thunderous applause. She looked out at the crowd, the community leaders she'd partnered with, the politicians who'd supported their initiatives, the families they'd helped, and felt something settle in her chest. Purpose. Worth. Home. 3 years ago, she began, her voice clear and strong. "I graduated with a degree in social work and a dream to help people. That dream didn't look like I expected. It took longer, hurt more, and required me to be braver than I thought possible. But it taught me something essential: you are not defined by other people's expectations. You are defined by what you do when nobody's watching. By whether you help when it's hard. By whether you stand up when it would be easier to stay silent." She thought about that night in the alley, the split-second decision to honk her horn. "A wise person once told me that I wasn't ordinary. That saving a stranger's life without hesitation made me extraordinary. At the time, I didn't believe it. But now I understand. Extraordinary isn't about being perfect or impressive or meeting someone else's standards. It's about being brave enough to be yourself, even when the world tells you that's not enough." In the crowd, she saw her parents watching. Her mother had tears in her eyes. "So to everyone here who's ever felt invisible, who's ever been told they're not enough, you are. You are enough, exactly as you are. And the moment you start believing that, everything changes." The applause was deafening. People stood, clapping, some wiping away tears. And Grace looked out at them all and smiled, radiant and free. After the gala, as guests were leaving, her parents approached her again. "That was a beautiful speech," her mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." "Grace," her father stopped, struggling. "We were wrong. About you. About what matters. We see that now." Grace looked at them, these people who'd shaped her childhood and broken her heart and spent 3 years pretending she didn't exist. She could feel the anger, the hurt, all of it still there beneath the surface. But she could also feel something else. Forgiveness, maybe. Or just the freedom that came from no longer needing their approval. "I appreciate that," she said quietly. "And maybe, someday, we can rebuild something. But right now, I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do. With or without you." Her mother nodded, tears spilling over. "We're proud of you." I know we don't have the right to say that, but we are. Thank you, Grace said. And she meant it. But it didn't change anything fundamental. She didn't need their pride anymore. She had her own. They left, and Dante appeared at her side again, offering his arm. Ready to go home? He asked. Yes. Grace took his arm, leaning into him slightly. Thank you. For all of this. For seeing me when I was invisible. You were never invisible, Grace. You just needed the right light to shine. He smiled down at her. And now you're illuminating everyone around you. They walked out together into the New York night, and Grace looked up at the city lights, the endless glittering possibilities. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, sitting in her graduation cap and gown with empty seats beside her. Thought about the delivery driver who'd pulled into an alley because she couldn't watch someone die. All of it had led here. To this moment. To this life. To being seen, valued, necessary. She'd saved a stranger twice and found herself in the process. She'd been called ordinary and proved them wrong. She'd been invisible and learned to shine. And she'd done it all by being exactly who she'd always been, Grace Chen, social worker, helper, the woman who ran toward danger because standing by wasn't in her nature. The woman who saved a mafia boss and ended up saving herself. I matter, she whispered to the night. You always did, Dante said beside her. You just needed to believe it. And finally, after years of being overlooked and dismissed and told she wasn't enough, Grace believed it. She mattered. She was extraordinary. And no one could ever make her invisible again.